This is Bill Coletti. I'm the CEO and founder of Kith. We're a crisis communications and reputation management firm. On this episode, we're going to be talking about when corporations screw up, how can you fix it, and how can you find redemption. But the extra thing that we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about it for individuals. When individuals make mistakes, when individuals find themselves in the glare of the bright lights of the media, what can they do about it? So stay tuned. We're looking forward to having a great conversation.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron, is the founder of FullMontyLeadership.com. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives, part of the Full Monty interview series. I'm your host, Dov Baron. I'm the founder of Full Monty Leadership, and I'm here to assist you tapping into the one thing in your business that changes everything. Let me ask you, do you need to up-level your leadership? My guess is you do, or you want to, because that's why you listen to this show. Mike Tyson once said, everyone has a plan until you get punched in the face. On this episode, we'll talk about how leaders show up in a crisis and what you can do when your reputation gets a punch in the face. How? Well, you'll have to catch the episode to find out. Remember, you can chat about this episode or any past episodes on our Facebook page. Just go look for Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Podcast. If you're a regular listener, a regular viewer, thank you for joining us. Strap yourself in. We're about to go Full Monty. As always, we need your help in staying relevant, so please take yourself over to iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, all those great places that we come out. Make sure that you leave a review for us. We really appreciate that. It helps us stay relevant. And when you do, also remember that we can be found on traditional radio stations across the United States, all the way from Georgia to Colorado Springs. You can look for us on Roku TV with over 100,000 subscribers. And if you're a regular listener, a big thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know, because you've made us the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners. With a potential reach of 2.5 to 4 million listeners for every show, we're honored and grateful to be cited by Inc.com as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. By the way, you can listen to us on Google Home and Alexa by simply saying, play Dov Baron podcast. Again, thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. All right, let's strip it down, dive right in. As a leader, whether you're a CEO, C-suite leader, sales leader, entrepreneur, or leader in any capacity, you know that losing your reputation can be like losing your virginity. Once it's gone, it's going to be very difficult to get it back. But what if you could, in fact, come back from a reputation aneurysm? Particularly if you are not just an individual, but what if you're a corporate entity? For instance, how does a company like BP come back from the reputational death blow that was the 2010 oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico? Well, stay tuned, because our guest on this episode is Bill Coletti. Bill is a reputation management, crisis communication, and personal and professional development expert, and best-selling author of Critical Moments, the New Mindset of Reputation Management. He has more than 25 years of global experience managing high-stakes crises. Issue management, media relations, challenged for both Fortune 500 companies and winning global political campaigns. Bill's clients have included AT&T, American Airlines, Xerox, Nuclear Energy Institute, Home Depot, American Express, Target, otherwise known as Target, and many major universities and global NGOs. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and welcome the manager of crisis, Mr. Bill Coletti.
And the crowd goes wild. The crowd goes wild.
The crowd goes wild, young man. Good to have you here, Bill. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure to be here. Thanks for doing what you do, and thanks for inviting me. This is amazing stuff, and look forward to talking about crisis and how leaders show up during a crisis.
You know, you and I had talked about in our pre-chat months and months ago that I'm not a fan of reality TV, but when there was a show that came on, I only saw one episode of it. My wife and I sat there watching this new show called Survivor, and I watched one episode and I went, wow, this show is going to be massive. And she said, why do you think so? And I said, because it reveals what happens to people in the most stressful situations. What is the truth? I imagine that the work you're doing is kind of like Survivor in the corporate world, because here's people put into the most difficult situations and having to face really what might be the worst of themselves. Is that a fair assumption, or is that sort of off a bit?
No, it's absolutely the case. And the phrase that I love that I think captures this is that the crucible of crisis doesn't develop your leadership, it reveals it. And so I don't think in a crisis. Now, there are different crises. There's small, medium, and large, and extra large. I don't think there's on-the-job training. I think you either show up and you're ready because you've thought about it in advance, or you show up and you just have that DNA, that core level that lets you thrive. But I don't think you fake it till you make it, because the world is looking at you too fast, and they will see what they see and form an opinion very, very quickly. So I think that crucible is critical.
Right. Now, as the, reputation management crisis communication guy, I have to ask this question for our listeners, which is, are you a spin doctor? I mean, isn't that really what it is? Isn't it just like, they do something stupid and you blow smoke up their ass and make us all believe that, really, whatever her name is, the latest pop star has gone into rehab and everything's all right.
Sure. I wouldn't be in denial. I think there is elements of that. I think there is a part of that that's there. I think as I've matured, I had that earlier in my career, that was the case. But I think really what I've seen and found now is that having my integrity and being and putting myself in the position of you, the general public, putting myself in the position of the receiver of the information, and that it's okay for companies to apologize. It is okay to just be honest. We screwed up, we're sorry, and we're going to fix it. That is a much more authentic response than the way we did it in maybe the 90s and the early 2000s, certainly the 80s, and certainly Richard Nixon in the 70s, is that there is much more credit for being transparent. So sure, I am taking lipstick on a pig, spin doctor, pick your metaphor, that's there. There is an element of telling the best story, but there's also an element of simply telling the truth, because the truth will always set you free, but the truth will always be revealed. The cover-up is far worse than the actual crime. And so that yes, you can spin, but if you spin lies, you can spin alternative facts perhaps, but you can never spin.
Oh, how very Trumpish. How very Trumpish. Alternative facts.
Unfortunately changed the game in not a good way. He's changed the game.
What's her name? Kellyanne Conway with her alternative facts.
Absolutely. It's a perversion of that, but there are perceptions and we have the ability to sort of shape an narrative, but it has to be, and the key point, and I've heard you, and I know you believe this, it has to be rooted in the truth. Your truth or the truths of the facts. I mean, if it's Friday, it's Friday. There's no denying that it's Friday.
Yeah. I mean, of course we are familiar with the Hollywoodized version of that, the Olivia Pope, rather, not Gray, from what was it called? Scandal, that TV series.
Scandal.
Yeah. And you worked in politics too. I mean, you worked on political campaigns. Tell us a little bit about what it's like to be inside of that world, because it seems, of course, again, Hollywoodized, but it seems like we're not talking about you, knowing where the bodies are buried, but we are talking about, it seems like there is genuinely telling the truth and the best version of the truth that includes accountability. But there is also, I mean, one would have to guess that there are people doing what you do without too much ethics.
Yeah, it's sad. It's unfortunate. And they do. So think about your first question about politics. And so, when you think of a political campaign, and I spent a lot in the first half of my career was doing campaigns in politics. And so in the United States, it's November. Most of our election days are in our November, other specials and what have you. But I view October, the 10 or 12 days before the election. I don't measure it as a time, it's a place. So October is a place. And the goal is to have fewer screw-ups, fewer crises than your opponent. You're trying to create crises for your opponent. Your opponent's trying to create crises for you. The goal at the end of the day is to have fewer screw-ups, fewer crises than the next guy. And so you are careening day by day, week by week, and then sometimes in social media, moment by moment, certainly in a presidential campaign, you are careening crisis to crisis. And so those skill sets of politics, which are very personal, that's a man or a woman putting themselves up for service, open to criticism. You have wives and kids and husbands and partners that are right there. And any candidate that I've worked with, the partner, the wife, the spouse, the husband, whatever, that's the greatest challenge, is the implications, because they are watching their partner be lied about or getting beat up. And so that's the real challenge. But campaigns are about, crisis avoidance. And when they happen, can you respond fastly? Are you ready? And then do you have the nimbleness of mind, back to that crucible of crisis? Are your leadership skills developed that you're really ready for it when they get revealed? So that's what campaigns are all about.
Can you, because of who you are and because of what you've done for so long, I would really like your perspective. I'd like your insight on what we're seeing in the political world today, because, you talked about Nixon, and it seems to me like, and I said this actually before Trump, I said this back in the days of George W., where we were hearing about phone taps and all those kinds of things. And I said, it's fascinating that for me, as a political animal, which I am, Nixon was removed from being president because of stuff that is now considered pretty much every day. Does it still seem like, does it seem like a very different political landscape for you in the context of crisis management? I remember when it was revealed that Trump used the pussy grab statement, and, so many people went, well, that's the end of him. And it's in many ways even strengthened his base. A lot of the stuff that he says that would have politically been self-destruction has actually strengthened his base. It seems like it's a very different world. If it is, why do you think that is?
Yeah, no, it absolutely is. It absolutely is. So the sort of Stonewall defense, or the characterize the Trumpian response, if you will, has been in the playbook for a while. Nixon did it for a very long time. So in corporate and in politics, that has been in the playbook. It was a very, very rarely called play. It was single digits, 15%, something like that, of all of the plays, because there was so much collateral damage and blowback when you did that. If you just sort of said, talk to the hand, and you were very aggressive with your response, there's examples of companies doing that. There's examples of politicians doing that. But as we had the democratization of information, and everybody can see everything anywhere, anytime, Twitter, Facebook, you name it, social media, since the world got democratized with information, that was never really, it was not popular. You would rather err on companies erring on the side of authenticity and telling the truth. And if you screw up, fix it and move on. Trump, so it's always been there. So this is not a new phenomenon. Trump his aggressive tone has always been there. He's just made it mainstream. And I've recently talked to a client who's in the middle of a very, very unfortunate situation where they're just fundamentally misunderstood because of some steps that they've made. And they are doing some very aggressive stands of, we are not going to shrink from this. We are going to operate business as usual. We are going to assert our best, and we are going to move forward. And it's working for them. They are turning the corner. And I attribute that to attention span. Attention is the new currency of this economy. Is that
Absolutely.
if we can that in your business, if you can capture attention, that is worth something as a currency. Leveraging against that, if I say, well, no, I didn't, and we move on, you kind of have the opportunity to sort of win the day or win the moment. I still think that if the facts are bad and truth is, and you say something untrue, it will catch up with you in the long term. It will hurt you in the long term. So I don't think it is, it is an approach. It's not the right approach.
It's just interesting for me because I think that, humans are very good at working in polarity. And the polarity is that it's clear to me that we are living in a far more transparent age, where people want transparency, talk about transparency. Social media makes it sort of inevitable.
Yep. And
at the same time, on the other side of that pole is this absolute stonewall. Nope. I'm in complete denial, and I will never apologize is what some of them will say. And, even if I'm wrong, it's just like, it's fascinating for me. And I love what you do, as you and I talked about before.
Sure.
I would love it as a personal job. It'd be maybe in an alternate reality, because it's fascinating to me, this polarity of absolute denial and even bold-faced lying in the face of that, which seems to be creating a cohesion with a certain group of people. And on the other side, absolute transparency that has gone a little nuts. Yes. So I see it's gone a bit crazy on both sides. I really love your input on that from how the work that you're doing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it even affects our polity. It affects the way we govern in a lot of countries, but particularly here in the United States, is that there is no room for compromise in the middle, because everybody's out on the fringes. Everybody's out on their extreme.
Yeah.
That works to their 33%, and that works to the base. But if you look at marketing and look at your audience, okay, is that if you drive content that meets the needs of your sliver of the world, that is an enriching thing. If you were a generalist that talked about gardening some weeks, leadership some weeks, and sports another week, nobody would know where to land. So there is an incentive for being disciplined and being focused on something. Not being willing to be open to new ideas, that's where things break down. And that's where I think we all, as a society, are in a bad place. We should be open to good ideas, and we should be able to learn. The second point that you raised is about this notion, I draw again back to your sort of coaching experience, is that you've had a client that says, well, no, I don't do that. That's not what I do. That's not at all what I do. I don't do that. You don't understand it. You don't understand me. And you simply say, yes, you do. Here is how you show up to your team. I've observed this. And they can continue doing that in denial, but you have to pierce through that. All right. The truth of your experience is going to be remarkably obvious, and it'll show up at the next staff meeting or show up when they get fired in that context. So I think in a political context, we're way too hardened left and right. I think there's room for compromise in the middle. I think in crisis response, we are seeing that as well, where everybody just wants to bow down and apologize for things basically they should not apologize for. I've got a framework and the way I think about risk. And I advise clients, if you didn't do it, you don't have to apologize for it. If you did it, apologize, fix it, and move on as fast as you can. But a hurricane, a tornado, an active shooter at your facility, you did nothing wrong. You are a victim, and you need to not be victimized, but you need to at least say, hey, we're going to fix it and we're going to move on. So you're absolutely right. There has been this ping pong back and forth. Do
you think we've lost, this is what appeals to me. Do you think that we've lost the clarity of mind to examine context as well as content? It seems to me like, as I said, I think that highly stressful crisis situations reveal something about us. There's no doubt about it. But I don't know that it reveals who we are. It reveals an element of who we are. And I think there's a context to that. I did a video recently, and in that video I talked about don't judge a book by its page. We say don't judge a book by its cover, but I talked about don't judge a book by its page or even its chapter, because if you read any great story, there's a chapter in there around where the person, if it's, about a main character, was a complete douchebag. I know I have done things in my life that I'm not proud of in the way that I was with other human beings. Mm-hmm. And I think we lose that context. When Kevin Hart apologized for making gay jokes 11 years ago, I think we've lost context.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, we have. I have a little bit of a different take on crisis.
Good.
And take crisis in whether it's be a family crisis where a cancer diagnosis is revealed. Sure. Granted, probably one of the worst days of anybody's life when they Absolutely. Get that diagnosis. Or when a loved one passes tragically, not a parent at the end of life, but someone, passes tragically, or a company that you built and it just is destroyed. I do think those defining moments, those moments reveal the core of our character.
Yeah.
And I think it really shows who we are, what we are, and what we're prepared for. And I believe in the human spirit, as you do, that we all have this remarkable capacity to rise up from any one of those horrible situations, whether it be a personal tragedy or a corporate tragedy. You can come back from that.
Yeah.
I do think it reveals who you are, and whether you run away, whether you run towards it, whether you embrace it and try to find a solution. So I think we see that in leaders that I work with, is that I hear a lot of folks that are the head of PR, the head of the communications. It says, I hate crisis. I don't ever want to be in crisis. And I'm like, you are just in the wrong business. I mean, this is not all about product launches and revealing next quarterly earnings. You have to be in that place. So I think that when we look at historical figures, companies, great leaders, I believe it is the moments of crisis that we remember, and it is the moments of crisis that define who they are and define their trajectory.
Mm-hmm. And there's another thing around this, and you and I had a great conversation about this before, which is crisis is an opportunity for redemption. Mm-hmm. But again, what I want to address here is there's two forms of redemption. There's the tail that's wagging the dog, meaning, the smoke and mirrors version of redemption, i.e. I'm going into rehab. Well, I'm actually not really, but it'll look like that. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to deal with my issues, but not really. Or mm-hmm. I'm going into rehab, and I'm going to really look at my issues, and I'm going to come back and I'm going to make amends. Mm-hmm. I really, there's two pieces I want to hear. One is, I want to talk to an audience member who is potentially going through a crisis in the way that we're talking about, and going, how do I face this? Okay, I got it. I realize that I've got to tell the truth. I don't know how to do that in a way that doesn't hang me immediately, mm-hmm. which is your work, and I know that that's your work. And I want to become a better human being through this. Okay, mm-hmm. that this is the baptism of fire. And on the other side, I want to talk about being the person who is a leader, looking in, potentially maybe even taking on somebody to work with us who has been through those things. And how do we sort out whether it was a smoke machine and it really wasn't redemption at all? It was actually just bullshit so that we could get the attention span away. Yeah. How do we sort those things out?
Yeah, great question. So I guess the corporate equivalency, you were talking about personal examples, but the corporate equivalency is we find ourselves in a crisis. This thing happened, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. We're going to appoint a blue ribbon panel. That's the equivalency of go to therapy. I'm going to put a blue ribbon panel. They're going to tell me what happened, and we're going to come up with a 10-point plan to fix things. Okay, so that's that equivalency. Add to that, I'm going to write a big check to some environmental fund. I'm going to write a big check to some organization, to Greenpeace or whoever I'm going to write a big check to. That's the same thing, all right, that I'm going to make amends, and then I'm going to learn and listen and grow. The way we see corporations mess that up, and the way we're seeing it now with social media and that democratization of information, is there are groups and individuals that are trying to hold people accountable. They are trying to hold them accountable for, you said in April you were going to do this. It's now November. Have you done it? That's there. So I think we're seeing that. I think that what we see in celebrities is that they do the classic trope that you just suggested. I'm going to go to rehab, but then 6 weeks, 6 months, a year later, back in the same boat. And at some point, the public just gets fed up. And the public just sort of says, that person is a screw up. And I think a little bit, I've worked in Los Angeles for a little bit, is that I know the punishing culture out there is that if you it's one strike and you're out. There's a room for redemption to a certain extent, but there's just too much money, too much risk. And so it has to be real. It has to be authentic. So for me to say blue ribbon panel, write a big check, or go to rehab and, make amends with those that you hurt, there has to be sustainability and long-term. And it's counterintuitive in this go-go internet age. We actually there's a long arc of success. And I think that people that get it right, embrace it. In your coaching, you've seen it. There are people that get it. There are people that say, yeah, I'm going to stop doing that nervous twitch that you talked to me about. Or they really, really embrace it. And that's up to them if they want to make that. It's up to them.
Let's talk about some, because you brought it up a couple of times. So let's talk about some of the specific corporate examples. Walmart had and maybe still has, a horrible reputation regarding employees who are underpaid and are on food stamps. Yeah, you and I talked last time about Cargill and selling palm oil, and it's derived from the destruction of the Sumatran rainforests, and is critically endangered the orangutans. So palm oil still around. Walmart is still around.
Candy bars are still around, absolutely.
Yeah. So and there are companies who who are maybe not exactly the size of Walmart, but are big companies that are paying a decent minimum wage, and that people are not on food stamps. And there are companies that are manufacturing palm oil products with, organically sourced, that are taking care of the forest and all the rest of it, and taking care of the orangutans. And some have even created foundations for orangutans. So, I'm using them. I talked about BP in the beginning, or even Shell out of Africa and the horrendous shit they were doing. So talk to us about, how do we get, me as a consumer, how do I trust that? Because, whether I'm a consumer or I'm running a company, if I'm a consumer, I want to know, can I trust this company? They said they're redeeming themselves, but they wrote a big fat check, but who really gives a shit? Because it's, I hear about these fines of $1 billion fines, and then I find out it was less than 1% of their earnings. They don't care, right? It's like, okay, a slap on the wrist. It's $1 billion. It looks like a lot of money to us, but it's not. Right. And then on the other side of it is, as a consumer, I don't know, can I trust these guys anymore?
Yeah.
So, at either side of that.
Yeah, no, it's a difficult question. So, you mentioned some really big companies. I think that I'm going to hold, what Shell was doing in Nigeria is an outlier. I think that was illegal, immoral, and proven to be such. So I think that's a little bit different than minimum wage and sort of some of the other things that are there. So I think Walmart understands with crystal clarity how they fit in a 360, three-dimensional marketplace. And they understand their customers and the need to have low prices. They are not Williams-Sonoma, all right? They are very clear in where they are. And so I think Walmart, for example, is trying and is successfully doing a lot of amazing things about solar energy and trying to get more and more of their stores off the electrical grid for the environmental savings, or the economic savings as well as the environmental savings that creates. They have some innovative programs that they are doing with their employees, but it is just easier to say because of one anecdote that one anecdote about minimum wage and food stamps and what have you. There are a lot of employees that think Walmart is an amazing employer, and they started at minimum wage and they're now a manager, or they're happy at minimum wage because it allowed them to work nights so that they could go to school during the day. So there are stories and narratives there. So I don't think that Walmart needs to overreact to all of these different attacks because they're doing 360, three-dimensional calculus on all of these things. And if you don't want to shop at Walmart, and my hunch is it is probably not a major destination for you or your family in your day.
Right.
But if you need a 6-pack of Coke or if you need something and the Walmart's there, why not? The moral outrage does not stop people from getting a good product at a good price that's there. And so the way we advise clients is that you need to look at this stuff holistically, okay? Right. Even if I told you tomorrow Walmart was going to pay everybody $20 an hour, and I don't want to pick on you, but you brought it up, but the attackers, the antagonists, if we said they're going to pay, Walmart's going to pay everybody $20 an hour and a guaranteed minimum of 30 hours that their people are going to be able to work, we would still complain about Chinese products. We would still complain about unsafe toys that they're selling. There is plenty of opportunity. So once you get that large, you are a target and you need to pick your battles, do what is the right thing. They are doing solar on their stores because it's the right thing to do. Good for them economically, and it also is good for the environment that's there. And so I think that, and they're also doing a lot of stuff with waste and their logistics and their trucks and things like that. But these are complex problems that are there. So I don't want to lose the thread here is that, Walmart just has to keep doing what they're doing. They continue to grow. They continue to expand. They are successful. Gen X, Gen Y, and Gen Z may change the marketplace. I don't know. But for us today, they're actually doing fine. We as consumers, you as a consumer, we get to make our own choice based on that. And there are alternatives.
Yeah. And I think that this is, I look at it from the other side, which is I hear many complaints about Amazon. It doesn't stop people buying on Amazon. And it's one of the things I've said for years is, if you really have any testicles, any gonads, then you need to vote with your dollars.
Sure.
And if you don't like the ethical stand of a company, then don't put money in their bank account. And that's that simple. That's the vote you get to have. But that's from me as an advisor to consumers. But I think that, we talked about redemption. We talked about false redemption versus real redemption, and solar. Well, that's easy for me to go, well, that's good for the company. that helps the profit line. And it's not like they're short of a few quid. So, we can have this ethical argument, and I'm not looking to have that, but we can have that. The point is, for me here, is this, the interesting thing for me particularly in the American psyche more than any other psyche, because America, people don't realize, is a very young country. It's barely out of its adolescence in the context of world history. And it's pretty forgiving. And I think that's a very interesting position for the work that you do, because people have a pretty short-term memory. And I think that in many ways that's a really good thing. Like we look at Robert Downey Jr., who was a fuck up in the largest possible way, said he loved the taste of the gun in his mouth, who cleaned up, became a great guy, has done great work. He always was a phenomenal actor, but has come back as a decent human being. And I think that, I'm using him because he's a Hollywood star. It's easy for us to associate. Yeah. But it can be the same with a company. I think that companies can do exactly that.
Yes.
Because the American public are actually very willing to forgive. I mean, all the outrage about George W. Bush is now, because now all the focus is on Trump and the Trump White House. And I was saying this to my wife just the other day. I said, I wonder how long it will be before people develop Trumpnesia. Instead of amnesia, they develop Trumpnesia. It's fascinating to me that it actually isn't that difficult, but to get redemption or to get forgiveness, I think the challenge is for us, as in if you're going through crisis management, to not get so caught up in it. And at the same time, still have the moral fiber to say, I need to take action here. I can't just go, well, we'll wait for it to blow over. I actually have to take an action. If you're working with a company right now, they've walked into you and they say, we did this, it was horrible, and we did it purposefully, but we never realized the massive consequence of it, whether that's on the environment or whatever it was, or on our employees. What would be the first thing you would say to somebody in that crisis? Because I think that sometimes, like, the CEO gets thrown under the bus, or, what would you say? What would you say to them?
Stop doing it. Stop. Whatever it is, in your hypothetical, just stop it. At whatever cost. If it is as extreme as you just described, you simply have to stop. That is the first step in redemption, is to just simply stop the bleeding, stop the damage, and move on. I think you need to, at a leadership level, CEOs, boards of directors, whatever the appropriate voice is, needs to say, we are aware, we've stopped, we're aware, we're on top of it, and we're trying to fix it as quickly as we can. I don't think you have to have the answers in moment one, all right? But you need to be on top of it and be aware. And so there's a lot of parallels between corporate crisis and personal crisis in that context. So there's some that are beautiful parallels and others where it sort of breaks down because of stakeholders and different constituencies and incentives, but generally they work out the same way. And so if we have a personal crisis, we have to simply stop. Robert Downer Jr. had to stop his addiction. That was the first thing he had to do. He had to admit that he had a problem, and then he had to go get the help and get the solution that was there. But what was the key to all of that is he had to do it.
Yeah.
Society's opinions, his failings didn't impact me whatsoever. Okay. There's another Hollywood star that can be Iron Man or can be whatever he needs to be. There's another one that's there. Didn't really impact me. What impacted my heart and hurt me is to see someone fail and someone hurt and a human do that. It hurts me when I see companies that don't understand that, because those are real jobs that they're providing to people. They are real services, real products. I don't think corporations are inherently evil in that context. So I think that the best and first advice is simply stop screwing up. That has to be the first thing we do. We can't fix the problem, a drug addiction or environmental problem, unless you've stopped doing it. You're not going to just do a little bit of coke that just doesn't get you to the solution. You kind of have to stop.
It coming back to, because you, like I said, you've worked on political campaigns, you've worked with individuals, you've worked with companies, and I named some big names up at the front there. But share with us, if you wouldn't mind, share with us an example of where somebody screwed up. They did massive, their reputation had a massive aneurysm, and there was a redemption. You and I had talked about this in a previous chat. There was a redemption. So, and because I think that sometimes we screw up because we're just ignorant, meaning we just don't know. Can you give us an example of that? If you have a personal,
sure. There's a couple.
There's a company, that would be great.
Yeah, there's two. So I'll do the personal part first, because I think that might be most relevant to people, and then I can do the corporate one that's there. There's a young man a couple of years ago that was on videotape saying a racist chant. He was at his fraternity party and said some racist things. I think he was 19, 20 years old at the time. Video became viral, got seen on social media, national news, huge tragedy. There was another young man also on the video. So there's two kids on the video, both basically doing the same thing. One went deep and dark and didn't do anything and basically just hid. We had the privilege of working for a young man that knew that he screwed up, but wanted to make amends. But most importantly, he wanted to personally grow. So he went on a personal journey in the wake of all of this media, working with us, to learn about lynching and racism and the issues that we're frankly not really taught. That might be a half of 20 minutes in an American history class to talk about the implications of what lynchings were. Is that lynching was just not simply crazy violence, but it was a means of crowd control. It was a means of societal control, and it was used as a tool to bring about change on others. That's what the chant was about. And so we went on a journey to learn about that. He went on a journey to learn about in the African-American community, and it culminates in an afternoon where he met with 25 African-American pastors in his state, student leaders from his college, for him to make his apology, but for him to listen to them. And it was one of the most beautiful moments I've ever seen in my corporate career, is that it was a glorious event of his raw emotion and openness to learning, and their empathy and understanding of leaning in on him and showing him, we understand, young man, this is our failing too. We did not share the implications of why these things are. We all know not to use the N-word, and we all know that slavery is bad, but do we really, really understand the implications that has on a society? This young man does. He now understands that. He then stood in front of 35 members of the media with about a dozen cameras and shared his apology. And so from a redemptive character building standpoint on him, amazing. He's now gone on 5 or 6 years later, got his master's degree, doing great work. But when you Google search him, it's not just the bad thing, it is the redemptive journey that is there. But I've got to tell you, Doug, that sucked. That was gut-wrenching for him, for his family. It was so much easier what the other young man did, of just sort of run away back to his house in Dallas and just do shutdown defense, which is a legitimate approach, shut down defense. But the men that they are have been fundamentally transformed. And I believe and love that family, and that family did the right thing by apologizing. And I was blamed by the president of the university and blamed by politicians that I was trying to spin his way out of this. This was a story of redemptive and the power of apology. And to your point about crisis, his character was revealed. He didn't develop that courage. It was revealed in that moment as a 20-year-old, something that he learned at 4, 5, 6, or on the Little League baseball field. The character of that other man was revealed equivalently and did something different. So that's a personal anecdote that I think is very, very powerful.
Before you go on there, though,
yeah.
I want to because there's, we're talking about crisis management and reputation, but that's an attack on your reputation too, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Right. Absolutely. Because, you defend somebody who, and it's not a spin, it's a genuine redemptive process. And then, you're a douchebag because you're defending somebody who's guilty.
Yeah.
So what's that like for you? That must be emotionally, I imagine that would be emotionally exhausting.
It was. It's not anymore. I have crystal clarity. I have a really high
I'm talking about when you're in it.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So, I've been lied to by corporations. I've had CEOs threaten me. I've had CEOs that would prefer that I spin over telling the truth, and that's their expectation. And so for me personally, early in my career, it was about, revenue and client satisfaction. And I don't know if I did it perfect all the time, and made some choices in hindsight like that I regret. I think now I've got crystal clarity on why I do what I do and why I do it. Let me just share with you an anecdote, one kind of recent one. I'm sure you're familiar with this, the scandal that we had in the United States about college admissions and kids writing parents writing big checks to get their kids into higher ed. So I was conflicted out of that. So I couldn't work on any one of those cases because I represented a company that was in the middle of that. So I was conflicted out. I couldn't work with any of the families. They did horrible things. And I'm curious of your personal reaction to that. And when I finish, I'd love to hear what your take is on those families. They no doubt did something horrible, and they used their wealth and their power in an extreme way that was inappropriate. But I have significant empathy for them. All right. And I wrote a blog post about this, and that empathy, and my team really criticized me to use that word, is that yes, they screwed up, but they didn't ask to be in the bright lights of every major publication in the country, worldwide. Most everybody worldwide wrote about that story. CNN, NBC, ABC, everybody else. I empathize with those people. And if my experience of having been there can help them weather that, I think that is a worthy gift for me to share. It doesn't mean I don't think what they did was horrific, but I think that I feel for them because I don't want to see them suffer. I know there are some people that want that. Some people would love to hoist them on a petard. That's not how I'm wired. And so to your core question is that I pick and choose my clients carefully. And then two, I sympathize and empathize with people that are going through this. And I've got a gift and a skill set that is helpful. And I would hope that if I did something wrong, you or someone else would lean in and offer advice and wisdom. And if that impacts negatively on me, I'm really okay with that.
But then we come back to, as I said, your reputation being damaged by somebody else's reputation. And that's when you have to fall back into your own sense of moral fiber and whatever that is. You and I had talked about Tony and how he and I had gone and spoke at the UN, and he was a neo-Nazi that I had helped to de-radicalize. And people asked me at the UN, how could you help him? And I said, because I could have compassion, I could have empathy, I could see, and I think that, when all this blew up, regarding these college admissions, my reaction was, yeah, that's pretty shitty thing to do. Because there are people who couldn't get into college, who worked damn hard, who didn't have money, and you paid for your kid to go who didn't want to go. Yeah. That's kind of that's pretty shitty. At the same time, I flip the chart for a moment and I go, okay, so tell me many poor people who wouldn't have done exactly the same if they'd have had the money.
They could have.
Right. So it's now the edges get blur. And I think that this is one of the great things of life. It's one of my favorite stories to read, movies to watch, are ones where the lines get blurred, because we've all got very strong moral lines until we're in it.
Yep.
I'm the Republican, I can't remember his name, but the Republican who said, homosexuality is an abomination, according to, and then the son comes out and says, listen, I'm gay. Well, I've evolved. Yeah, I guess you would, because this is the thing. Every one of us has got very hard lines until we're in the situation. And so the difficulty is that we go, well, I would never do that. And my answer is, how do you know? Unless you are there with the gun to your head situationally, you don't know. And there are all kinds of things that we would like to judge, but until we're actually in it, I don't know. I don't have much compassion for the parents who did the things you're talking about, but I understand it, because I understand that we all want to do the best for our kids, and that we all want the best thing for our children. We want them to have the greatest things. I have a ton of compassion for the kids who actually didn't say, I want to go to college and I'm a dumb shit, but you got some money, mom, so can you pay me in?
Right.
I feel for them.
But if one of them came to you, so there's two things. There's the bright lights of media, which is what I do. But if one of them came to you, these are corporate executives, heads of big law firms. There's some really serious people that were there. But if one of them came to you and said, I've heard your stuff, I need your coaching, I would love your help. Does your anger, frustration, disdain for what they did change your ability to help them because of your unique gifts and skills? And would you reject them as a client, even though you thought what they did was horrible?
Absolutely not.
Yeah,
I would see, for me, because of who I am, like you, I'm always looking, I believe that human beings are not broken. I believe that we wear some coats that are covered in crap, and we believe the coat, but we're not the coat. We are what's underneath the coat. And so human beings are spectacular, and we make terrible mistakes. I know I've made massive ones, and I don't want to be judged by the page or even by the chapter, let alone the cover. Right. So, but at the same time, I have to be willing to do a rewrite. And I'm more interested in that than what you actually did. I'm more interested in, are you willing to do a rewrite? And are you willing to continually evolve that rewrite and deepen that rewrite and do the work. And I think that's so I can have compassion for that. Like I said, I have more compassion for the people who are pulled into something. So like, you know, if BP does X, Y, and Z, or Shell does, or Walmart or Cargill or whoever it is does X, Y, and Z, I think they need their wrist slapped, and I think there's they need to get some serious wrist slapping around it. But I also look at, well, shit, how many people now lose their job?
Exactly.
Who are, you know, who are barely over the poverty line.
Exactly.
Right? But at the same time, that is the moral balancing act of, I need to punish, I need to make sure that you're aware that this is not okay, but I don't want to punish the people who are caught in the ripple effect of that. Like I said, these kids who maybe didn't even want to go to college. I mean, one of them's a freaking Instagram influencer. That's all she wants to do. Yes. Right? I'm not saying that's a great thing to do or a bad thing to do. I'm just saying, you know, so I'm with you. I think there's a bigger piece here.
Yeah. And I want to, you know, the point of the question was, how does it impact me and impact my reputation?
Yeah.
I've fired clients, you know, because it was bad, or my team didn't want to do it. I really listen to my team, and I love my team and the way they share with me their insight, and their clarity is sometimes better than mine when I've got to make payroll, or when I've got to, you know, I get excited about something. They see that. So it's certainly not, I wish my refinement was so perfect I got it right all the time. But I need a team to do that, to see that clarity. But no, I do think about it. But like you, I've got a unique skill set, and my unique skill set gets applied in very unique situations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can totally see that.
Yeah. I don't want to be out front. I don't need my name in the story,
right.
But I'm not ashamed of it.
No. You know, you were just talking about evolving and doing the work and those kinds of things. What was something that, you know, was there a turning point in your life, in your leadership, in your business philosophy?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's twofold. I think in a personal standpoint, it's certainly my divorce. I mean, I got divorced, I guess coming up on 10 years ago, got divorced. And so that was one. And then I think other was leaving a big global public relations firm. We were a big PR firm, and I had a fancy title, and left there to go do my own thing. And I wandered aimlessly around as an entrepreneur for might've been 2 or 3 years, figuring out what I wanted to do. 1 year was to try to find another job and not go do my own thing, joint ventures that went bad. And so there's lots of sort of wandering around the desert trying to figure it out. So those were the two major inflection points, one personal and one professional, but the professional one was pretty personal in that context. So those are the two moments.
And how did it change you?
Yeah. So the divorce really forced me to be introspective and look at myself. I didn't think my stuff stunk. And I thought I was pretty all that. And then kind of got whopped in the face with a 2x4, and stops you dead in your tracks and said, well, maybe I'm not all that. And so took it to an extreme of really doubting a sense of worth and really doubting a sense of any value. So you had to sort of plow up from that. But I think I would have had a different conversation with you then than I am now about my own personal clarity then to now. So I think that's what it taught me. It taught me that I'm pretty screwed up and I'm doing the best I can. And I now give advice to clients based on my experience, my wisdom, and my insight. And if it's not guaranteed to work, but it's based on my experience, my wisdom, and my insight. And I'm okay with that if it doesn't work. I would not have done that 10 or so years ago, or 10 plus years ago. It took the divorce to do that. I think entrepreneurially is just getting real clarity on who I want to be. So I think that's the clarity from the entrepreneurial journey.
You know, I'm a great believer that we are shaped and formed psychologically in the early parts of our lives. Those formative years, no matter what it is, they can become the thing that breaks us. They can be the things that help us to build our own wings. And you chose a very interesting field of expertise. Do you see a correlation at all between your childhood and how you ended up being this guy doing what it is you're doing?
Terrific question. And on that journey post-divorce, I've done the work.
I'm sure.
You know what I mean? So I've done the work. And so we did unpack a lot of that. So I've got some real clarity on that. So my mother and father, two amazing, fabulous people who just recently moved to Austin, Texas. Both of them are still alive, 94 and 83 respectively. So I'm just absolutely blessed to have my mom and dad here in Austin with me. But they had been divorced previously from other people. A little bit of Brady Bunch came together and have been now married for 60 or so years on their journey. So it's been awesome. And so I was the product of their union and two stepkids on either side. So there's the five of us. So I was very much and still remain the peacemaker in the family. I'm very much that when crisis happens, I'm the youngest, but I am the first one that the family calls. I am the first one to run in and lean in. So there, I don't know if we ever really found, other than just trying to make peace, but I don't think we ever really found the specific of the crisis per se that formed that, but always was cool and confident and comfortable and had the ability to just tell the truth and speak truth to power that was there. Whether that power was my brother or that power was someone else in my family. So I think it came, I can't think of a defining moment because I lived in therapy, actually was in some small group stuff with some therapists or with some counselors and a therapist. I was envious of all these people that had these amazing traumas and turmoils in their youth and how it galvanized them. I didn't have that. Mm-hmm. I was raised by wonderful parents and we had wonderful opportunities. And so I have struggled to find that pit of failure. And it took until I was 45 years old in my divorce to find it. It would have been nicer to have found it at 16. The stakes are a little bit lower, but I eventually found it.
But I think that one of the things around that is that we get competitive about pain. We get competitive about trauma. And the truth of the matter is that pain, just like courage, is subjective.
Yes.
And what I mean by that is just because I wasn't raped and you were, doesn't mean that I wasn't traumatized by a situation or that mine is measurable against yours. Because there are if we look at them in the level of minor versus major, there are things that seem very minor to some people that are extraordinarily major for others. And we have to understand that and that there is something called subjective reality. And so when we go, well, I'm sitting in group therapy and I didn't go through what they go through, I don't have the right. Yes, you do have the right. You have the right to deal with and grow, particularly whatever it is you're going through.
Right.
In this process of our own growth, of our own development, I believe that leadership takes real courage. What is the most difficult leadership decision you've had to make? I mean, you're put into particularly unique situations. What is the most difficult leadership challenge you've had to face?
That I've had to recommend to a client or had to do my embrace for my own?
For yourself, the most difficult leadership decision you've had to make for yourself.
To exclusively focus on my discipline. To exclusively focus on crisis and reputation management. Mm-hmm. I could have started a PR firm and done a wide range of things, and that crisis and reputation was just one of a half a dozen offerings. Probably would have been more lucrative, potentially. Probably would have let me have a bigger footprint and things like that. But I don't like those things and I'm not good at those things. I'm sure I could be good at those things, but I'm really good at what I do. So the most courageous business decision to stick to, the decision in and of itself was relatively easy, but sticking to was the hard part, is to really be focused on this discipline and then for specific marketplaces, major corporations that's there. So I think that's been the most difficult one. One that as soon as you said it was hiring my first person and signing up for payroll. That was the second most challenging thing that was there, but we've been, you know, revenue positive. We've been blessed with great clients. So that one's not that big a deal. It's pretty scary when you sign up for that first person that you're responsible for.
Yeah, that's true for all of us. What's a guilty pleasure for Bill?
You know, so I sail. I love sailing. I love being on the water. I snuck out yesterday afternoon and went to the boat and changed the coolant on the engine. It didn't need to be changed, but it was a nice day and I wanted to go out to the boat. So that's a guilty pleasure. I could have, sure, there are phone calls I could have done or content I could have written, but that's a guilty pleasure. I went out, changed the oil. You know, reading about historical figures, I don't think it's a guilty pleasure because I actually has application to what I do.
Sure.
But being able to slip away on a Wednesday afternoon, and I do an occasional boat delivery. I'll help people deliver boats, and so I'll kind of check out for 10 days here and there. And so that's a guilty pleasure. I don't watch a lot of TV, so it's not Seinfeld reruns or whatever. I don't really have those.
Scandal reruns.
Or scandal reruns. I don't really have those. It's really more about boating and things like that. Beautiful.
This has been an awesome conversation. Actually, there's so many other places we could have gone, and I just really enjoyed it. I always like to finish by asking my guests, what is a practical piece of guidance you can offer, you know, so let's say to a company or an individual who is facing crisis right now, because I'm sure that people don't reach out to Bill and say, hey, unless there is a frickin' crisis, right? So what is the best piece of advice you can give to somebody at two levels, one in a crisis and one who is not in a crisis, but you want to give them practical guidance moving forward?
Yeah, I'll do the second first,
Sure.
Not in crisis.
Yep.
So I have a meditation practice and I love my meditation practice. And so I think quiet, thoughtful reflection about what if would be the best advice I could give a corporation or an individual, for them to say, read the New York Times and say, okay, that just happened to a competitor. What if that had been us? Are we ready for that? And whether you are a Fortune 500 company or a small lumber yard, there are enough sexual harassment, active shooter, data breach challenges that impact companies to quietly and thoughtfully reflect. If that was me, I was the CEO of that company I'm reading about, to quietly, thoughtfully reflect. It's simple, it's easy. What would I do to get involved, or what would I do to manage that situation? And then that reveals dozens of questions that leaders need to ask. Are we ready? Do we have resources? Do we have this? Do we have that? Whatever that case may be. So
that's
I think
a great practicality. Yeah.
Thoughtful reflection on read the news. Is that, you know, I guess
the person in it, the person in it.
Yeah. For the person is acknowledge.
Time to reach out to you.
Yeah. Have the courage to reach out to me. And so I speak a lot to public relations professionals and communications professionals. There are, and when I sweep in, the first negative relationship I have is typically with the head of communications, you know, is because the leadership has said, Mr. or Mrs. X, you're not up to the task. I'm going to bring in an outside expert. So I'm immediately a threat. And so my guidance or reflection is be okay not being okay at crisis, and admit it and say, that's not my thing. And there's a company that we work for, head of communications is a dear friend, and he has just said, I don't want to do this. I'm not good at this. I don't have the temperament and mindset to do it. And that has been such an epiphany. And he and I don't have a threatened relationship. We've got a very healthy relationship. He has to show up. It's his job. I mean, there are days that he has to show up. They can't call me for everything. But I think at a personal level, being okay, not being okay at something is the advice, in crisis specifically. Not everybody can do it.
Well, I think that's actually a great piece of practical advice for leadership.
Yeah.
Is be okay at not being okay at whatever it is. As leaders, we often think that we have to be great at everything, and it's just not true. It's just not true. And we've got to embrace that we're not always going to be great at things. And like you said, sometimes that means making a choice that we'd rather not make. This has been great, Bill. Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed our conversation. Please tell our listeners, our viewers, where they can find out more about you and all your wonderful resources.
Yeah, awesome. So Twitter, it's just B Coletti. On Twitter is a great platform. I love LinkedIn. I provide a lot of content on LinkedIn. Again, it's Bill Coletti on LinkedIn. And then our Kith website, our firm's name is kith.co. And we got a great blog where I write something, once a week about all these different topics. So Twitter, LinkedIn, and our website. You can always get a hold of us there.
And of course, we will make sure that we post all of those on the show notes. Kith is Kith, and it's .co, not com.
Exactly.
Okay, co. As I said, we'll put it into the show notes along with all the other ways to reach out to Bill. Again, Bill, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate your wisdom, your insight. There's so many places I wanted to go that we just didn't get time to go. We wanted to talk about the Me Too movement. We wanted to talk about sexual harassment. We wanted to talk about data breaching. There's all kinds of great subjects, and maybe we can come back and have another conversation at some point in time. However, for you, dear listener, remember, information's worth the hole in the donut. So you got to apply it. Take the time to just take a few minutes and listen back and take some notes and really think about that practical piece of advice that Bill just shared, which was really, really awesome. And if you want to hang out with other conscious leaders and chat about this episode or any past episode, just simply go onto our Facebook page and search out Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Podcast. You can find out more about me, Dov Baron, and to hiring me as your speaker or as your strategist for your organization, you can reach out to me at fullmontyleadership.com/consulting or fullmontyleadership.com/speaking. Be aware that the research consistently shows that even the fastest growing companies face the challenge of spending a fortune in training, attracting and developing talent, only to have them leave at an alarming rate. If you're sick of investing in training and development of your talent, only have them leave before you get your ROI, then come talk to us at fullmontyleadership.com, where we provide the essential leadership skills to rekindle and amplify the hidden loyalty assets inside of your organization by tapping into purpose. fullmontyleadership.com, because you can't outsource authenticity. Also, remember to stop by the Matrix, matrix.fullmontyleadership.com. That's Matrix like the movie, no triple W's, just Matrix like the movie.fullmontyleadership.com, and get your authentic leadership matrix assessment tool. And it will show you the 5 areas of leadership where your strengths truly lie and where you can really grow. Thank you for sharing the show with everyone you know. Until next time, stay curious, my friend. Stay curious about how to take care of your reputation, and more importantly, how to redeem yourself in the face of crisis by simply asking, what if? I'm Dov Baron, and I'm here to assist you tapping into your deep greatness to reach the next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, and your leadership impact. And I am out.